A luxury helicopter broke down in the middle of a deserted Texas landing strip. The wealthy executive inside was furious. No mechanic would come. But then a teenage girl in greasy overalls, the janitor's daughter, stepped out of the shadows and said, "I can fix it." The man laughed until minutes later the rotors thundered back to life. What he did not know was that the girl he mocked would return the next day as the owner of an entire helicopter fleet. Before we start, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now let's begin. Before we start, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now let's begin. "I saw the smoke from over there," the girl said, pointing toward a small trailer parked behind the hangar. "I think I can help." Mike blinked, then let out a harsh laugh. "You? Where is your supervisor?" The girl wiped her hands on an oil-stained rag. "My name is Casey. My dad works here, he's the janitor. I hang around fixing things, helicopters, engines, motors. I just like solving problems that others can't." Mike's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "You fix helicopters? That's adorable." Casey walked past him without flinching, ignoring the condescension in his voice. She approached the helicopter like she owned it, crouched beneath the main rotor and tapped twice on the engine housing. The panel opened as if she had done it 1,000 times before. Mike watched in stunned silence as she separated wires with surgical precision, checked fluid levels with the confidence of a master mechanic, and adjusted components with the ease of someone born to understand machines. 15 minutes later, the helicopter's systems hummed back to life. Warning lights shifted from red to green, and the engines breathed with renewed power. Casey stood up, wiped her hands clean and simply said, "You're good to go." Mike stared, speechless. Who was this girl, and why did it feel like everything he thought he knew about the world had just been turned upside down? For a moment, the only sound on the landing strip was the steady hum of the helicopter's restored systems. Mike stood frozen, watching this teenage girl, barely old enough to have a driver's license, dust her hands off and walk away like what she had accomplished meant nothing. No boasting, no pride, just calm, devastating competence. Mike whispered to himself, how did she even know what was wrong? His mind raced. This wasn't normal. No one repaired a Bell 429's engine system that quickly, not without years of specialized training, and certainly not with that kind of quiet confidence that spoke of deeper knowledge. Casey was already halfway across the tarmac, her toolbox scraping against the concrete as she dragged it behind her like a faithful shadow. Mike called out, his voice cracking slightly, "Wait. Who taught you that?" Casey turned, her expression unreadable in the harsh Texas sunlight. "My father is obsessed with aircraft. He cleans hangars for a living, but he studies every manual he can get his hands on. He used to teach me while he worked late shifts. He always said knowledge was free if you were hungry enough for it." Her eyes flicked back to the helicopter. "He's working double shifts now to pay for my college applications, but I kept learning anyway." Mike's jaw tightened. For a second he saw something in Casey that both impressed and unnerved him. Raw, untamed brilliance that hadn't been polished by corporate training or dulled by institutional thinking. He had spent his entire career in boardrooms filled with perfectly groomed executives who spoke in rehearsed sound bites. But this girl, she fixed things silently, without permission, without apology, without expecting anything in return. Mike reached into his wallet and pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills. "For your help." Casey stared at the money, then looked directly into his eyes. "I didn't help you for money," she said quietly and walked away. That night, Mike sat in his penthouse office in Houston, 42 stories above the glittering city lights. His mind should have been focused on a crucial merger with the Norwegian energy consortium, but he kept thinking about the girl who had fixed his helicopter like it was a broken bicycle. No formal training, no certificates, no credentials, just hunger and brilliance. He pulled up his laptop and accessed a private aircraft registry database. The landing strip in rural Texas had been abandoned for years, removed from official aviation records when the local flight school went bankrupt. He wasn't even sure how his pilot had found it during their emergency landing, but he remembered the small trailer parked behind the rusted hangar. He made a call to his personal attorney. "I want that entire property purchased by tomorrow morning, and I want the full name and background of the girl who lives in that trailer." By dawn, his lawyer had sent a detailed report. The land was now his and the girl's name was Casey Martinez. Her father, Tony Martinez, had worked as a janitor at various aviation facilities across Texas for over 20 years. Casey had never attended a formal aviation program, but her academic records showed perfect scores in mathematics and physics. Mike stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunrise paint the Houston skyline in shades of gold and crimson. He remembered Casey's steady hands, her calm voice, and how she had walked away without expecting praise or recognition. Something about that moment had lodged itself deep in his mind and refused to let go. He whispered to his reflection in the glass, "Let's see what happens when a girl like that is given the entire sky." The next morning, Casey was jolted awake by a sound that didn't belong in her world: the deep, mechanical thunder of multiple helicopters approaching. She bolted upright in her narrow bed and peered through the trailer's small window. Her breath caught in her throat. A convoy of black SUVs was rolling down the dusty access road, kicking up clouds of red Texas dirt. Behind them, 3 gleaming helicopters descended from the morning sky with military precision, their rotors cutting through the silence like the blades of destiny itself. Casey pulled on her boots and stepped outside, her heart pounding as the lead SUV came to a stop just yards from her trailer. The door opened and out stepped Mike Harrison. But this wasn't the sweaty, frustrated executive she had met yesterday. This man looked like he owned not just the sky but everything beneath it. His charcoal suit cut through the morning heat like a knife, and even the desert sun seemed to step aside for him. "What are you doing here?" Casey asked, her voice cautious but steady. Mike didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply handed her a thick manila folder. "You're standing on land that I now own. As of last night, this entire property, including the hangar and everything within a 2-mile radius, belongs to Harrison Aerospace Industries." Casey's heart sank like a stone. "So you came here to evict me?" "No," Mike replied, his voice cutting through her fear like a laser. "I came here to offer you something that will change your life forever." A long silence stretched between them as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of desert sage and possibility. Casey looked down at the folder in her trembling hands. Inside were papers, logos, and 3 words that made her breath hitch: Harrison Aerospace Industries. Casey's fingers tightened on the folder's edges. "I don't understand what you want from me." "You will," Mike said, stepping closer. "Yesterday you fixed something that stumped 3 certified mechanics in Dallas. You think like an engineer, you move like a surgeon, and you walked away like you owed the world nothing. That's exactly the kind of mind I need to revolutionize this industry." "I'm not qualified for anything," Casey said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike nodded slowly. "Exactly. You're not corrupted by conventional thinking or limited by what others say is impossible." The door of another SUV opened, and a woman in a flight suit stepped out, carrying a sleek tablet and an expression of barely contained excitement. "We're establishing a mobile research facility here," she announced. "We're going to build a helicopter testing and development center using your instincts and your knowledge. And you're going to lead it." Casey stepped backward, nearly stumbling. "Lead it? I've never even filled out a job application, let alone managed anything." Mike took another step closer, his eyes blazing with conviction. "Then don't manage, create. Don't follow protocols, rewrite them. That's the job." Behind them, construction crews were already unloading equipment from massive trucks that had appeared as if by magic. The abandoned landing strip was transforming before Casey's eyes, evolving from a forgotten piece of Texas wilderness into something that looked like the future itself. Casey's voice cracked with uncertainty. "What if I fail? What if I'm not as smart as you think I am?" Mike finally smiled, and when he did, it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "Then you'll fail more spectacularly than anyone has ever dared to try. And even that will teach us something valuable." Casey stood motionless as the Texas wind whipped her hair across her face. She looked at the trailer where she had spent countless nights dreaming of bigger things, at the worn toolbox that had been her closest companion, and then at the beginnings of something incredible rising from the red dust around her. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, and for the first time in her life she was ready to jump. "When do we start?" she whispered. 8 months later, the forgotten corner of Texas had been transformed into something that defied imagination. Where tumbleweeds and silence had once ruled, now stood a gleaming aerospace facility that looked like it had been transported from the future. Glass towers reached toward the sky, solar arrays glittered like diamonds in the desert sun, and a state-of-the-art runway hummed with activity as helicopters of every size and configuration came and went like mechanical birds. Casey stood on the observation deck of the main tower, no longer wearing greasy overalls but a custom flight jacket with Horizon Air Chief Technical Architect embroidered across the back. The transformation wasn't just in the landscape, it was in her. She was no longer the janitor's daughter hiding behind a toolbox. She was the mind behind a revolutionary helicopter fleet designed to change how the world thought about rotorcraft efficiency and environmental impact. Her hands had shaped every blueprint, her logic had guided every decision, and her vision had breathed life into machines that were about to make history. Today one of her creations was taking its maiden flight. In the control room below, engineers monitored banks of glowing screens while a countdown echoed through speakers. Casey stood behind the primary console, her eyes locked on the hangar as its massive doors began to slide open. Mike entered quietly, his presence as commanding as ever, but now there was something else in his bearing. Respect earned through months of watching impossible things become reality. "Ready?" he asked softly. Casey nodded, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "We've triple-checked every system. Fuel efficiency is optimized, stability controls are perfect, environmental impact is at zero. It's time to show the world what we've built." Outside, the helicopter emerged from the hangar like a mechanical phoenix rising from the ashes of doubt. It was sleek as a razor and twice as deadly beautiful, painted in deep navy with silver accents that caught the sunlight like captured lightning. The name painted across its hull read, Horizon Air 1, in letters that seemed to shimmer with promise. Casey had chosen the name herself. It was what her father Tony used to call her whenever she solved a problem that left adults scratching their heads. His little girl who could see beyond the horizon. As Horizon Air 1 gained speed down the runway, the control room fell silent. The soft hum of its revolutionary engines grew into a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of what people thought helicopters could do. The aircraft lifted off, and instead of the usual thunderous noise, it rose with a whisper that spoke of engineering precision beyond anything the industry had ever seen. Above the desert, it flew like poetry written in metal and dreams. Casey exhaled a breath she felt like she had been holding for her entire life. The control room erupted in cheers, engineers embracing and tears flowing freely, but Casey didn't move. Her eyes remained locked on the sky, watching her creation disappear into the endless blue Texas horizon. Mike placed a hand on her shoulder and said quietly, "Tony would be proud beyond words." Casey nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "He always believed I could fly before I even believed I could dream." Suddenly the control room doors burst open. A stream of people in expensive suits flooded in. Representatives from international aerospace companies, military contractors, environmental organizations, and media outlets from around the world. Cameras clicked like mechanical insects, hands extended in congratulations, and voices rose in a chorus of amazement. They had all come to meet the mind behind the miracle. But as they swarmed toward Casey, Mike stepped forward and raised his hand, instantly silencing the room with the kind of authority that came from years of commanding boardrooms and bending industries to his will. "Before any of you speak," he said, his voice cutting through the excitement like a blade, "there's something you need to understand. The woman who just sent the future of aviation into the sky was once dismissed as nothing more than a janitor's daughter. She was overlooked, underestimated, and laughed at until she fixed something none of your experts could touch. And now, every single one of you answers to her." Casey looked at the faces before her, some filled with awe, others flushed with embarrassment as they remembered their own assumptions about who could and couldn't change the world. But she wasn't there for their approval or their apologies. She turned back to the window, watching Horizon Air 1 carve graceful patterns across the sky like calligraphy written in clouds. In that moment she knew with crystalline certainty that this was only the beginning. 8 months became a full year, and in that time, Casey's name stopped being whispered in the corners of engineering conferences and started echoing through the halls of power from Washington to Tokyo. Her designs hadn't just worked, They had revolutionized everything the world thought it knew about helicopter efficiency, environmental impact, and the very limits of rotorcraft capability. Horizon Air 1 had been followed by Horizon Air 2, 3, and 4, each one faster, cleaner, and more advanced than anything flying in civilian or military skies. Orders poured in from governments, corporations, and private buyers who were willing to pay astronomical sums for technology that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Yet Casey remained the same girl who had once sat under a flickering light bulb in a cramped trailer, building model helicopters from cardboard and copper wire while her father worked double shifts to keep their dreams alive. Today she stood on the stage of the International Aerospace Innovation Summit in Austin, surrounded by the brightest minds from 6 continents. Camera flashes exploded like stars, applause thundered like a storm, but Casey's attention wasn't on the crowd. It was focused on one man sitting in the front row, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap, tears streaming down his face without shame. Tony Martinez, retired janitor and the man who had taught his daughter that knowledge was free for anyone hungry enough to claim it. The man who had never held a title that impressed anyone but had given his daughter the wings to soar above every limitation society had tried to place on her. The moderator, a distinguished woman from MIT, leaned toward the microphone. Before we begin the technical presentation, Casey, is there anything you'd like to say to this gathering of the world's most accomplished aerospace professionals? Casey stepped toward the microphone, and the vast auditorium fell so silent that the sound of her breathing seemed to echo off the walls. I've spent most of my life being told exactly where I belonged, she began, her voice steady and clear. I was told I belonged behind a mop, that I belonged under an engine hood but never in a cockpit, that I belonged in the background while others presented my ideas as their own. But there was one person who believed in me before the world even knew my name existed. She turned, looking directly into Tony's eyes, her voice growing stronger with each word. This man used to bring home broken electronics from office buildings he cleaned so I could take them apart and learn how they worked. He gave me my first real toolbox when I was 7 years old. He taught me that every problem was just a puzzle waiting for the right mind to solve it. And when people laughed at the idea that a janitor's daughter could ever design aircraft that would change the world, he would just smile and say, "They'll see. Someday they'll all see." The entire auditorium rose to their feet as one, the applause crashing over Casey like a wave of vindication. Tony's eyes were no longer just glistening. Tears ran down his cheeks in rivers of pride and overwhelming joy. Later that evening, Mike approached Casey with an envelope. Inside was a letter from a 15-year-old girl in New Mexico whose physics teacher had told her that girls like her don't become engineers. "But then I saw your speech," the letter read. "Now I know they're wrong. I know I can build things too. Thank you for showing me that impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet." Casey smiled as she folded the letter and slipped it into her jacket pocket, right next to her heart. In a quiet moment near midnight, she stood on the observation deck overlooking her fleet of helicopters. A journalist approached her with one final question. "And what's next for you?" Casey looked up at the star-scattered Texas sky, her eyes reflecting constellations of dreams that hadn't even been born yet. "Higher," she whispered. "We're going to fly higher than anyone ever thought possible."